Really?
Right.
I was noted by some of the press as being LBJ's favorite MC, and my response was he liked my price. But I got in trouble with him quite a bit for a little while at all. He had a party for Admiral Nimitz. I think Johnson was a speaker at the time. And it was a stag affair on the front lawn of the LBJ Ranch. John Conley was there. He was Governor Conley at the time. And a bunch of big shots. And one of them was Hume Cofer, who was representing Billy Saul Estes, was a judge involved with the Billy Saul Estes affair. Billy Saul Estes was a Texas man well known for some very shady deals that he pulled, and some of them were right at that particular time making headlines all over the country. But and Cofer was the judge. No, I take it back. Cofer was representing him. He had been a judge and was now in private practice and was representing Billy Saul Estes, and he was in the audience that day. So I brought a couple of singers up. They sang some folk songs, and for some masochistic reason, I decided to sing a song that I had written, a parody on the song of the Texas official state song, "Texas, Our Texas." But I titled it The Ballad of Billy Saul Estes. And it was meant for fun, and the audience was very appreciative. They were slapping their knees and having a jolly good time with each line I sang. But then it got quieter and quieter and quieter, and I knew what was happening. The man who ran the ranch was not amused by the song that I had chosen to sing. And pretty soon I said to myself, I'm just standing up here singing myself to death, but I got to finish the song. Well, I came to one line that involved John Conley, and John Conley let out the most beautiful, gorgeous, loud guffaw I've ever heard in my life. Well, that gave the rest of the audience license to laugh again. Johnson, being the politician that he was, counted heads and decided he better join too. So he laughed with the rest of them. I finally finished that damn song. And I told John afterwards, I said, John, if you run for Pope, I'll vote for you. Another time I got in trouble with him. I was married to a West Texas ranch gal. And Jewel had a way of speaking her mind. And she was about 8 months pregnant, and we were having a station party. And Johnson and Lady Bird frequently came to the station parties. And he came over to our table. He loved to dance, Johnson did. And he said, come on, Jewel, let's dance. She said, no, I'm too pregnant. She said, I'm too pregnant to dance. He said, I like to dance with pregnant people. So he just grabbed her by the arm, took her up on the dance floor, dancing along. So I asked Lady Bird if she'd care to dance too, dutifully. She said yes.
Start back, so I asked Lady.
So he went over to my wife, Jewel, who was 8 months pregnant, and says, come on, Jewel, let's dance. She said, I'm too pregnant to dance, Mr. President. He said, no, come on, I like to dance with pregnant women. So he grabbed her and pulled her on the dance floor. They were dancing, and I'd asked Lady Bird if she'd like to dance, and she said yes. And we were within earshot. And I heard him say to Jewel, said, Jewel, if you'll name that boy Lyndon, I'll give you a yearling calf. And she said, Mr. President, I'd rather name him yearling calf. And Lady Bird went, Another time, suicidally, again, a station Christmas party. And at that time, he was speaker, majority speaker. And was being considered, the rumor was that he was going to run for president. And he had been on Face the Nation, and almost every question they had asked him was regarding that decision. Had he made it? Was he thinking about it? And with every question thrown at him, he responded with, "I'm not a candidate for the president. I have never been a candidate for the presidency. I do not intend to be a candidate for the presidency." So I took those clips of his responses on Face the Nation and filmed my own panel involving our poor news editor, Paul Bolton, Ray Waddell, one of our news department, Barbara Robertson from our continuity department, and several others to be their own panel. And they would ask questions, Mr. President, you are noted as a cowboy. Do you still like to get out there on the horse and ride the range? I'm not a candidate for the presidency. I am not intending to be a candidate. I will never be a candidate for the presidency. Mr. President, what's your favorite food? I'm not a candidate for the presidency. And the staff was just laughing, roaring with laughter. And they too got quieter and quieter and quieter, and all I could hear was the whir of that damn machine. And afterwards, he went to all the members of the panel and chewed their butts out. Scared the hell out of them. Never went to me about it, and I never figured out why he didn't. But we all survived.
Did Jewel not like him? Mm-hmm. Did Jewel not like him?
Jewel liked him, yeah. Jewel really liked him. She was West Texas Ranch, and she spoke cattle, she spoke deer, she wore bandanas easily. Another time, I got in hot water with him. We had a wonderful, wonderful character working for the radio station named Packer Jack Wallace. And when he first came to us, he had the all-night shift, had a deep, gravelly voice, and especially the women just loved to hear him talking to him in the middle of the night. And we were pregnant with our last baby about that. My wife was pregnant with our last child about that time. And I'd get up in the middle of the night to fix a bottle for the baby. But I would also use it as an occasion to call Jack just to let him know that somebody was listening. But I never called as myself. I'd call and say, "Wallace, this is Lyndon Johnson. I'm up here at the ranch playing dominoes with the boys. Would you play me Yellow Rose of Texas?" He said, "Yes, sir, Senator Johnson." And then here would come Yellow Rose of Texas out on there. I'd call down the station, "Jack, this is Cactus. What are you doing playing Yellow Rose of Texas? That's not on a playlist." He said, "By gosh, if Senator Johnson wants to hear it, he's going to hear it." That went on for about 2 months. Finally, Jack caught on that I'd been pulling his leg. Well, shortly thereafter, there was an election on in Texas, and Vice President Johnson was at the ranch. No, he was still Speaker then. Speaker Johnson was at the ranch. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, he called down the station. Says, "Wallace, this is Lyndon Johnson. Would you read me the latest election results?" Jack says, "Oh, yeah, well, this is Martha Washington. Come down and get them yourself." The next voice he heard was that of the station manager, Jesse Kellum. Whew. When Johnson became president, a lot of the news sources stationed cameras outside the radio station to see if he was still involved with the radio station. It was Lady Bird's radio and television station. But they had placed their earnings into, what do you call it when you...
Trust.
You know what?
Trust.
They had placed all of their businesses in trust, including radio and television. But they were all hoping to catch him going into that station. And they never did. And he never did have much of a hand in the station itself, other than one, to hire his mother as a consultant And I was program director at that time. And she would consult, she would critique the whole station monthly, for which she was paid a pretty good sum. And thank God I was one of her favorites. But also when any of his people would come down to Austin, he would have them listen to the station, monitor it, and to critique it. And that became a pain in the ass because as program director, I'd get the word that so-and-so said this would be better if we did it this way. There were a few good suggestions, but mostly I just ignored them and we went on. Johnson's main function before it was put in trust was to give the sales staff a little pep talk. And he'd come to town and he'd call all the members of the sales staff together and he would just chew ass. And it had a wonderful effect because they would respond. I'll never forget one time, though, in the Driscoll Hotel, they were holding a meeting. Johnson was holding forth, lecturing and scolding the sales staff, all the department heads, and was really ripping and tearing because business was off. And I never will forget, this is an aside, but he requested some water, or told Walter Jenkins his right arm, to get him some water. Walter got down on his hands and knees and crawled like a dog out of the vision of LBJ to do this. And that really saddened me. And then Warren Woodward and Lady Bird got into a conversation over the side about what to do for supper after the meeting was over. And they were speaking a little too loudly. And he stopped, and in front of Lady Bird's staff said, "Lady Bird, I'm here on your business trying to help you. Now, if you want to put a show on, you can get yourself a hula skirt and dance or something. But otherwise, please let me hold forth." And it was very embarrassing for everybody. Well, right after that, we went down to El Rancho, favorite Mexican food place, and had dinner together. And Johnson got up and apologized to her. He says, "Sometimes I get carried away with what I'm trying to do, and that was not a nice thing for me to say, and I apologize to you." And he grew quite a bit in my esteem then. Can you hold it a second?
Yeah. Cactus, we got a great story of Leonard Maltin.
Okay. He was very conscious of business and would give you a commentary on the commercials you did and your delivery. And I remember even after he became president, I saw him on some occasion. He said, "I heard you do your cash carry commercial the other day. That was pretty good. That was pretty good." And I said, "Thank you, Mr. President." Tell you a golf story. Johnson played golf, as I understand it, only about once a year, and that was when they go to Acapulco for the Christmas season. And he used to play with President Aleman, former President Aleman of Mexico. And on one occasion, I remember with Darrell Royal and Bob Hope. And the Secret Service soon learned that they had other duties than protecting the president from assassins or whatever, also to protect him from the wilds of the jungles, because his golf balls seemed to be always going out into the jungles when he was playing down there in Mexico. And they would have to go in there and look for the balls. It's not in their itinerary, but not in their blue book. But they would accommodate him. So they finally decided that they needed to give the president a present. And they gave him about 4 boxes of golf balls with LBJ's signature on the side of them. And they got about 12 other boxes that they kept to themselves. So then when they'd go out and play, and he'd hit his ball way out in the boondocks, they'd go out there and say, "Mr. President, here it is, right over here, sitting up on this little knoll right there. You got a clear shot." And he said, "Well, I didn't think I went that far." "Yeah, here it is, Mr. President." And of course, it was one of his balls. So one day, the professional golfer from that club in Mexico called him. I think he was in San Antonio, and says, "Mr. President, my wife and I are over here in San Antonio, and I just wanted to call and let you know that we're thinking about you and hope you come back down and play some golf with us sometime." And Johnson said, "Hey, well, come on over for supper." Said, "We got time, and I expect you here, and here's how you get here," and gave him instruction how to come. So they came, and they had a wonderful meal. Mike Howard was the head of the Secret Service, and it was his idea about the golf balls, and he was also at that dinner, and as was Lady Bird. And they had a wonderful meal, reminisced about golf, etc. And finally, Mr. Johnson said, "I noticed that in your pro shop you had a great big barrel full of golf balls. Where did they come from?" He said, "Well, those are balls that my caddies find out in the woods and in the ponds, and we put them in this barrel, and they're still in good condition, and we sell them for about a half price." Johnson says, "Well, I bet you never did find any of my balls put in that barrel." "Oh, yeah, Mr. President, we got hundreds of your golf balls in there." Mike said, "You need to work on your touch game to the pro." As I said, when they gave me the job of program director, radio and television, I chose not to be a part of the political part of it, but I did get involved, volunteered for, and was granted the opportunity to be an advance man. I advanced the Kennedy Johnson campaign, and also was an advance man on his whistle stop through the South. And I'll have to confess this, I went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi as an advance man to get everything ready. Well, I got down there and discovered they weren't ready at all. They had no advertising, they had no band, they had no program. And the whistle stop was going to be made at Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So I went to the Democratic head of Hattiesburg area. I said, "Look, we got to get to work. We got to have some advertising. We got to get people out. We need to get a band." So he took me over to the University Band, Mississippi something University. And they said, "We cannot play because it's a political event." And I said, "But we really need to have a band. This is going to be on national television." He said, "Well, I'm just sorry, but we can't do that." And I said, "All right, I guess we'll have to go to the next town, but this is going to be on all 3 networks, according to my information." Well, we got our band, and we got them down there. But they had no money. And I went to the head of the Democratic Party and said, we got to advertise. He said, "Well, we just don't have any money." So I took out ads in the paper, and I took out ads on the radio stations, and we got about 5,000 people out on the tracks of that train track. And when that train left, I left with it. The bill came in to the Democratic Party for all the advertising. That haunted me because about 10 years later, I was doing a show in Mississippi. And my wife and I had flown into New Orleans, and it was going to be on a stock farm, and all of the stock, it was for the stockmen of Mississippi. And our driver came and picked us up to drive us to and fro. And I asked him his name, and he gave me his name, and it was a familiar name. And I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Hattiesburg, Mississippi." And then I realized that our driver was the son of the man who was head of the Democratic Party, who was still calling me every night wanting his money back for that advertising. I changed the subject quickly and never mentioned that episode. But on another occasion, I was the advance man for Houston, Texas. And it was the night of the afternoon that had been preceded in the afternoon by that dastardly occasion when Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird were going from the Adolphus Hotel in Dallas over to the Baker Hotel, and they were confronted by a group of women, one of them the wife of Governor Clements, Rita Clements, and they were spat upon and abused verbally and even shoved around some. Well, I inherited them that night when they arrived in Houston at the airport, and Johnson was not in a good mood. And he said to me, he said, "You tell the police we don't want a bunch of sirens blaring their way into the hotel." I said, "All right, so I'll go tell the chief of police." Did they have sirens? They had sirens like you never heard before in all your life. We got to the hotel, and he said, "Give me the lineup of who's who in the rooms." And I hadn't been told that you're supposed to do that. And I said, "Well, I don't have it." He said, "I want you to come to my room right now." I go in there. Bill Moyers was there, and his head of his staff.
Walter?
Hmm?
Walter?
No. In the White House.
Walter Jenkins?
No.
Marvin Watson?
Marvin Watson. There was Bill Moyers and Marvin Watson. And he started chewing ass because he was not happy with anything that had happened that day. And Marvin and Bill and I were the subjects. And literally, I mean, he went on for over a couple hours, just venting. And we realized that he really needed to vent. So there was no debating at all. But he literally went to sleep. He was so tired, so exhausted, but his mouth never stopped moving. And I have never forgotten that in all my life. I'm just happy he was so fatigued. I did yeah. That's about it, unless you got some.
The eggs.
Hmm?
The eggs.
The eggs.
The eggs he was selling from the rack.
Okay, yeah. We saw a lot more of him, of course, when he decided not to run for re-election, came back to the ranch. And one of the poignant things about that time was he took an interest in football. And Darrell Royal represented to him, to Johnson, sort of a counterpart of his life, who had come from practically nowhere to become a big success. And he would really like to have Darrell in his company. And would he have him bring some of his recruits up to the ranch, and he'd give them that old Johnson talk and say, "Now, this is where you need to play football, boys. This is where you need to play football." But he also got in the egg business. Had chickens at the ranch. And he'd come to town and drive into the parking lot underneath the television station and sell eggs. And you bought eggs when he asked you to buy his egg. Joe Roddy came in one day, and he looked like he had, Joe was one of our newsmen, and he looked like he had mumps all over. And what he had was eggs stuffed here and in his pockets, almost everywhere but his mouth. And I said, "What the hell's wrong with you?" He said, "The man asked if I wanted to buy some eggs," and I did, of course. And everybody dutifully bought eggs for him, and I think I owed him for a couple of dozens, but never quite paid him for it. But he was our egg man, and a darn good one. It was sad to see him unwind, and no matter what the subject was, sooner or later he'd get back to Vietnam. You could be talking football, you could be talking hunting, cattle, horses, but eventually he would get back to Vietnam. He was haunted, of course. And you hated it, because this was his retreat. This is where he came to, where his roots were, and well, he felt at home, where he felt safe, where he felt happy. But it was no longer the oasis, because it just couldn't heal that wound.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Before he was president, when he was Senate Majority Leader, he too, like Lady Bird Johnson, would help with a little PR. And we would have various clients to come up to this ranch that we had leased for the hunting season, for deer hunting season. And he'd always come and howdy and shake hands, have a little drink with the boys, and not even mention radio, but thank them for their business. And he brought his dog along. What was that dog's name? Yuki. And Jake Pickle had come up there with him. And everybody was slapping their knees and having a good time, listening to Johnson's stories. He was really on a run, holding forth. And the dog started whining. And the president said, Jake, or the senator says, Jake, take this dog outside so he can relieve himself. Jake was not very happy about that. But he took the dog outside, and we heard, Johnson, what's that? Somebody said, it sounded like a dog in distress. Pickle came back in and says, the president said, what'd you do to that dog? Oh, I think he saw a rabbit running through there. He didn't like that. Have you heard the hunting story about the young Kennedy?
Yeah.
And the gun sight?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jake told that.
That's mean. That's mean.
Yeah. Well.
Had dinner with Lady Bird the other night. Dick Hall. Did you know Dick? The lawyer who came down and took over the whole organization. When Thomas was sinking, he brought it all together again and sold the cable company, which was unsaleable at the time. Really did a magnificent job of doing it. Anyway, he took us, Mrs. Johnson, out to dinner, and she sure was tired.
Yeah.
And
She was here yesterday or Monday for the presentation of the Lady Bird Johnson Conservation Award.